Mercy 2.0 was a bit of an experiment. I wanted to see what I could create in a week using this style. When I first set out to make this animation, I wasn't exactly sure how it would turn out. I'm really glad so many of you guys enjoyed it, and I know a lot of you guys were interested in how I made it. So here's a behind the scenes making of how-to video or whatever of what I did. So let's just go ahead and get started. I just opened the Blender and then I press the mix button and then I just poop it out and it's good, it's done. Okay, just kidding. Here's how we do it. So, for those of you guys who don't know much about animation, let me walk you through the few processes that it takes to make it. First thing we have is modeling, which is basically you create the models or the meshes or the polygons or whatever you want to call it. The characters need to be created. That's modeling, and then we have texturing, which is the coloring part of it. Then we have rigging, which is the part where you actually put a skeleton in their body and allow them to actually start moving, which then brings you to animation, where you actually move them, and then of course rendering, which is where you press the F12 button in Blender and it will essentially calculate all the light and finalize the look and make everything look really pretty. That's what rendering is. And then of course you have post-processing, also known as compositing, which I usually do in After Effects, which makes it even more pretty with some special effects like glow and motion blur and stuff like that. And then we also have sound design and video editing in case I need to cut anything off, which I didn't because I usually cut everything in Blender as it is, because you never want to animate more than you have to. But somewhere in between there we also have the effects pass, where we actually do before rendering, where we place the practical effects in there, for example smoke and muzzle flares and stuff like that. In our case, these are actually all in the form of cards, which is a piece of geometry that has an animated texture on it to represent a certain effect, for example smoke or muzzle flares, etc, etc. So that is what I do, and I do pretty much the entire process. Yeah, I do all of that. So me as a one-man army, I basically have to know a little bit about everything. These are the different processes, and let's go ahead and walk through exactly what I did in each process. So overall, this video took a little bit over a week to complete from start to finish, not including the assets, because many of the assets were either downloaded or developed a long time ago for some other project. So luckily, Mercy, her face was already created for the Attack on Katsu video, and I also had her body downloaded essentially from online somewhere, which was a rip from the game itself. So we actually were able to use the original Mercy model as well as the original Genji model. That is how the modeling process happened. So I went ahead and just edited the textures and the shaders and gave everything a toon shader look. Now, the textures for the original game models were very detailed and had a lot of shading to it that wasn't supposed to be there for toon shading, so I wanted to clean it up a little bit. I did that in Blender using material nodes. It's very simple. You just up the contrast and the brightness, and boom, a lot of the detail went away, which is exactly what I wanted. And then the next step of the process was rigging. So I had created a rig from a long time ago that is meant to deal with a specific type of mocap that I like to use. Now, this mocap possibility is what drove me to use this particular rig. But this rig, I'll admit, is not one of my best rigs and is actually really hard to use for hand animation. However, I wanted to use it just in case I wanted to use mocap down the road to speed up the process within that week time frame, because I set a deadline for myself and it seemed a bit impossible. But I ended up hand animating the entire thing. Anyway, so I was using that rig, but luckily after I mapped the rig's position and stuff like that, the geometry for the body was already so good because it was a game model that most of the weight mapping, the automatic weight mapping, was actually already good enough. So I didn't spend more than like a day on the rigging process, which is pretty good. Now, after that, the animation process, I can talk about all day. This probably took me the longest time, being about 3 or 4 days. But overall, it was a pretty quick turnaround. I mean, this is a 1-minute animation, so it was about, 1,500 frames-ish within these 4 days. This was probably one of the fastest turnarounds I've ever done for one of these animations, besides New Challenger Approaches, which also took a week and a half, actually. So let's talk a little bit about the choreography, because a lot of people are curious about that. Now, choreography is something that I'm very passionate about. I always enjoy making choreography, and I really enjoy making action films. So this is something that I've always been studying for many years now. So I can't talk about everything in this one video, but just to give you an idea of what my process is like, I basically just sit here quietly with my eyes closed while listening to the same song over and over again to try to get an idea of exactly what everything is going to look like and how everything's going to feel. The reason why you want to listen to music is so that you can hit the right beats and get a rhythm going as a basis, which is really helpful. And so I usually choose a song to choreograph to in my mind. And fun fact, the song that I chose this time was actually Rap God by Eminem, but played at 125%. So yeah, there's just a fun fact if you guys ever want to listen to that and play it back at the same time. I'm not going to play it here. I don't want to get copyrighted. So anyway, after that, I write down the beats that I wanted to hit and then make sure I don't forget about that after I brainstormed the first time. I brainstormed pretty much all of it within like a few minutes, and then had to just work the rest of the days working on it. Now, some people might be asking, where did I learn how to animate? I'm completely self-taught. I've never actually watched any tutorials on animation actually at all. I probably should at this point. But anyway, I'm self-taught, and it's really fun. I really enjoy animation. But that aside, after animation, I actually took some time to do the effects, and the effects are all cards or pieces of geometry that have animated textures on them. These were all created by Shane Newville over the course of, however many months. He's been building a little library of effects that have been really good. They're all 2D animated effects that I place in 3D using these cards. The only effect that I actually made myself, technically speaking, is the smoke explosion effect, and yeah, the rest of those effects are mostly his, including the muzzle flare and stuff like that. But yeah, after the effects part, we go into the rendering portion. So the rendering portion is really interesting because a lot of it has to do with preparing for post-processing or compositing. So basically the rendering stuff is pretty straightforward for toon shading. It's actually very fast. There's not a lot of light calculation that needs to be done because it's basically just black or white. Is it lit or is it not? And that's much less complicated than a realistic scene where you have to gauge exactly how lit a certain surface is and stuff like that. So much simpler, but it still took a few hours to render the whole thing. I think maybe about 6 to 12 hours to render because I had to re-render a few times because I'm not perfect. I mess up and I gotta re-render stuff. But ultimately, that took a little while. And what I did was I separated it out into different layers, including the character layers and the effects layers and the background layers. And Mercy's wings are also separate layers. So these 4 layers are all separate. Basically, I gave the effects a glow, an ambient glow, like a fog glow. And then I also gave Mercy's wings a glow, separate from her character, because they should be, pretty shiny. And I gave the background a slight glow. That worked out pretty well, and overall, I think it enhanced the look quite a bit. Post-processing is super important in terms of getting something to actually look nice and polished. And finally, we have sound design. Now, the sound effects were all done by me as well. The process consists mostly of literally finding good sounds and putting them in your timeline. But there is one secret to sound design, and that is to layer so many sounds together that you're not really sure what sounds you use, but it sounds cool in the end. So that's like, just make sure you layer enough in there so people can't recognize the same sounds over and over again. But yeah, that's basically the entire process. If you guys want to start learning how to do animations, I highly recommend Blender, which is a completely free and open source software. Obviously, you can see it can make stuff like this. I personally recommend the Fundamentals of Blender tutorial series, which I actually made myself, so I'm a little biased, but they are actually the official Blender tutorials on Blender's YouTube channel. If you guys have any questions, feel free to join me in my Discord. Discord.gg/dillongoo is where you can go. I'm there to answer questions, and so are a lot of other Blender heads. They're all in the Discord just hanging out and answering questions if you need it. It's a really great support system and a great community for artists. And we have special events in there sometimes, and plushie giveaways. I don't know, that's gonna convince you guys to go, whatever. So anyway, I'll see you guys in there, and I hope you guys enjoyed this behind the scenes video. Thanks for joining, have a good day, and don't forget to look both ways before you cross the street.